I direct an undergraduate research program, but until about 10 years ago, I had never put the words undergraduate and research together before. I had this idea, I think, that research looked something like this, that it was something that graduate students and postdocs engaged in. There were probably lab coats and beakers involved and maybe microscopes. And I'm a professor of literature. But here I am, 5 years into serving as an undergraduate research director at Bridgewater State University. It's a program in which hundreds of students every year immerse themselves in scholarly work all across the disciplines. And for some of them, it changes their lives. Many of them are indeed in laboratories, working with beakers and microscopes, and they're doing the kinds of work that I never would have dreamed possible for undergraduate students. There are students right now working on phthalate, or you probably know about BPA, phthalate leaching into infant bottles and sippy cups, even in products that are labeled BPA-free. Phthalates are known endocrine disruptors, so this is very important research. They're out in the field. They're here in Bridgewater, in Carver Pond, and they're across the world in Cambodia, building and testing biosand filters for clean, safe drinking water in a country in which children die every day from waterborne pathogens. They're in K through 12 classrooms all across southeastern Massachusetts. They're creating curricula that are inclusive and just and changing our elementary and secondary education. They're in libraries, museums, and archives. They're delving into texts and artifacts, and they're illuminating for all of us aspects of our culture and history. They're in studios and theaters, creating breathtaking works of performing and visual arts. So as you can probably imagine, I love my job. But I hope by the year 2040 it will be eliminated, because we will not need any undergraduate research directors. Because engaging in undergraduate research and creative scholarship will be the central defining experience of every student. Every professor will be offering these opportunities. Every student can count on that opportunity. The experiential immersive learning will be what defines a college education for every student in every program. So we're looking forward 25 years. And at the same time tonight, I've been thinking about looking back, 27 years actually, to my first year of college. I was a first-generation college student. I'm from a low-income family. I'm one of 7 children. And we were raised by a mother who still, for 60 years, has been suffering from mental illness. She's had periods of debilitating depression in her life. She's had hallucinations that are terrifying. And as children, the 7 of us had very little information, very little to know what to do. And in lots of families that are affected by mental illness, there was a great deal of shame. There was avoidance of talking about it. And we didn't have the internet. This was long before the internet. I think how wonderful it would have been to be able to type in symptoms and behaviors and have a handle on what was going on. And the closest thing we had was a set of World Book encyclopedias that I think were from 1958. And I know we looked up a lot of things in those books, but they wouldn't have helped us in that case. And the broader culture we were part of wasn't any help, really. I don't know if it's because I'm a Southern Californian. I was born in the hospital that's across the street from the NBC studios in Burbank, so I feel like my whole life's been kind of prescribed by what's on television. But when I was growing up, we were watching lots of perfectly functional families on television. There was no sign that anybody had any rifts in their families. And think about it, we were watching the Cleavers and the Waltons and then the Bradys, and then even into the 80s we had the Huxtables and the Keatons. And oh my goodness, what I would have done for the Roseanne Barr show at that time, or Married with Children, when we first started to see some flickers of family dysfunction in television sitcoms. We didn't have any sense of that. So it's perhaps no surprise that we just used to pray that the bad periods would pass quickly And every one of us, we turned 18 and we left, one by one. And I'm number 5. I opted for college. And I found myself, first-generation college student, first year writing in Professor Bob Gorsh's class, and he assigned a research project in which he wanted us to delve into something that we deeply cared about, that we really wanted to know more about, that we would be willing to grapple with for weeks. And I was a very good student. I figured I knew how to get A's. And the day came when we announced our research topics and we were going to work through our research approach. And I announced mine. Euthanasia, which is probably the most overdone research project of the 1980s. And very fortunately, my professor saw right through me. Here's this uninspired plan of mine, and he just looked at me, and I can still remember he scrunched up his face, and he was like, "But you don't give a damn about euthanasia." He's like, "What do you care about, Jenny? What do you really want to know about?" I said, "I'd like to know what's wrong with my mother." And now I was on to something. And I started a research study that literally changed my life. I read all about severe clinical depression. I learned about electroshock therapy, which my mother had undergone, and the long-term effects, which explained a lot. It was totally revelatory. And I learned that I was part of a whole community, an enormous one, of kids like me who grew up with mothers who couldn't get out of bed some days, and they had made it. And I began a more compassionate relationship with my mother, for sure. And I would venture to say that I probably would not have pursued a career in higher education if I had not had that research assignment my first year writing class. Because what I learned there, besides that really great information, was that my questions mattered, that my experience was immensely valuable, and that my experience was a place for me to start to do my work. And I learned that academic inquiry could be deeply meaningful as well as rigorous. The advent of undergraduate research is key to this broader transformation we're seeing in higher education. What I experienced then, what my students and the undergraduate researchers in our programs are experiencing now, what if we could ensure that every student had that opportunity? We'd be serving them well for decades to come. I mean, we can only imagine a sliver of what life is going to be like in 2040, but I'd bet on that. We know that what actually matters for student success is engagement in directly relevant, mentored, and sustained experiences. We know now that lecturing is the most ineffective way for people to learn information. We know that students who memorize information for tests forget that information days later. There was a study done by Gallup last year. It's been cited a lot. College graduates had double the chances of being engaged in their work and were 3 times as likely to be thriving in several measures of well-being if they had simply been mentored by a professor on a long-term undergraduate project. 3 times as likely to be thriving in well-being. That's phenomenal. We know that human beings learn best when we can make connections between our lived experience and new information. When we can discover and create knowledge rather than just have it fed to us. And when we have a stake in and a responsibility for our own learning. This is hugely important for our students' well-being, but it's also really important for their career prospects. You may know that the unemployment rate for recent college graduates continues to be higher than the general unemployment rate. And employers are saying, there have been a lot of studies about this, employers are saying it's not just the economy. They're saying that too many students are getting through college as passive learners. They're getting employers said in a recent survey that they had jobs available for recent college graduates. Half of them said they could not find graduates who were qualified for those positions because they weren't ready for today's workplace. It's really just distressing until you hear what the problems are and that we can solve this. Employers are saying too many recent college graduates are not adaptable. They know this bit of information and they're having a hard time extending it to new problems and new questions. And they're saying too many recent college grads want to stay in their comfort zone in the workplace rather than reach out and collaborate with people with different perspectives and experiences and backgrounds than their own. They continue to say that students are not getting enough experience with oral and written communication in college, and that the whole issue of dealing with complex problems, which is exactly what we're trying to do in undergraduate research, right, is not being explored by enough students. That they'll get into the workplace, this is what in some big employer surveys, and when they're confronted with a complex problem, rush to a very simplistic solution because they're just trying to shut down that difficulty. By 2040, I hope that students won't just study one particular subject or train for a particular career, that they're not going to come to college and say, I'm going to do X. Because the employers are basically saying, with a few exceptions, we don't really care what you major in. We want to know that you've had some experiences in deep, immersive learning that are going to serve you no matter what your career is. We know that the students of the future need to prepare for an evolving set of career opportunities. They're quite unpredictable. They need flexible thinking, they need excellent communication skills, and a passion for innovation so that they can take on opportunities that we can't even imagine yet. Thank you very much.